A dark fantasy mystery. They woke up to empty streets. No screams. No bodies. Just shadows burned into the ground, silent reminders of the people who once stood there. 1. The First Disappearance. It started in Raven's Hollow, a quiet village on the outskirts of Eldoria. A place where farmers tilled the land by day and shared stories by the fire at night. But on the morning of the first disappearance, the village awoke to silence. No birds sang. No footsteps echoed. No voices called across the square. Instead, there were shadows. Black, burned imprints of people, frozen mid-stride, mid-conversation, mid-motion. A child's shadow reaching for an apple. A merchant's silhouette leaning against a cart. An old man's form hunched by the well. But the people themselves were gone. Eldoria's scholars dismissed it. A trick of the morning mist, they said. Perhaps a sickness swept through, or the villagers fled in fear. But they could not explain why no one remembered their names. It was as if the people of Raven's Hollow had never existed at all. And then, it happened again. 2. The Scholar Who Remembered. Darian was not a warrior, nor a noble, nor a man of faith. He was a historian, a keeper of forgotten things. And as a man who spent his life buried in ancient texts, he knew one thing for certain. This had happened before. He had seen the records, faded and hidden in the royal archives. Eldoria's past was littered with gaps, entire villages erased from history, their names reduced to whispers in old tomes. It followed a pattern. Every 100 years, for a single month, people began to vanish. And no one ever remembered them. Except, this time, Darian did. He had seen Raven's Hollow before the vanishing. He had spoken to its people, shared meals with its families. But now, when he mentioned the village, no one knew what he was talking about. The capital's scholars dismissed his concerns. The king's advisors ignored his warnings. The nobility cared little for the fate of the commoners. But Darian knew the truth. And if the pattern was correct, in 7 days, the entire kingdom would be gone. 3. The Seer of Blackwood. Desperate for answers, Darian sought out the blind Seer of Blackwood. She lived on the edge of a cursed forest where even the bravest dared not tread. It was said she could see things no mortal eyes could, things buried in time. Her hut was small and twisted, built from gnarled roots and scorched wood. Inside, the air smelled of old parchment and burned herbs. The seer sat in the center of the room, staring at nothing. Because she had no eyes. "Speak," she whispered. Darian hesitated. "The disappearances, they are happening again." The seer tilted her head. "They never stopped." His breath caught. "You mean? The vanishing is not a curse, nor a disease. It is a debt." Darian's blood ran cold. "A debt to what?" "The shadows," she murmured. "Eldoria made a pact long ago. A bargain sealed in blood. And now, the shadows have come to collect." 4. The Forgotten King's Pact. Through ancient texts and forbidden scrolls, Darian uncovered the truth. Centuries ago, King Aldrich the Tyrant feared death. He sought power beyond human reach, and in his arrogance, he called upon an ancient force, one that lived in the darkness between worlds. The entity granted him a deal. Eternal rule. But at a price. Every 100 years, a portion of the kingdom would be erased. Not just killed, wiped from existence itself. The people would vanish, their names forgotten, their shadows left as silent graves. In return, the royal bloodline would remain untouched. The problem? The contract was breaking down. The shadows were no longer content with a portion of the kingdom. They wanted everything. And the final night was approaching. 5. The Royal Deception. Darian stormed into the palace, demanding an audience with King Eldric V, the last descendant of Aldrich. The throne room was dimly lit, torches casting long, flickering shadows on the stone walls. The king sat atop his gilded throne, his face eerily calm. "You know," Darian said, his voice shaking. "You know the truth." The king sighed, swirling wine in his goblet. "Of course I do." Rage flared inside Darian. "You let your people be erased. I let them pay the price for a kingdom that thrives." The king's eyes darkened. "Do you think empires are built without sacrifice?" Darian clenched his fists. "The shadows are not stopping at a few villages. They will take everything." The king smiled. "Perhaps it is time." Madness. Darian realized then, Eldrick was not a man fighting for his kingdom. He was a man resigned to its doom. And if the king would not act, Darian would. 6. The Last Light. There was only one way to break the contract, the Lantern of Elthar. A relic of pure light, hidden deep within the palace vaults. If Darian could reach it, he could banish the shadows forever. But the king would not let him. As Darian fled through the palace corridors, the shadows rose from the floor, twisting into monstrous forms. Black tendrils lashed at him, hissing with hunger. Guards, overtaken by the darkness, turned against him, their eyes empty voids, their bodies half faded into nothingness. Darian ran, breath ragged, heart pounding. The throne room was collapsing, walls crumbling as the darkness consumed the very stone. At last, he reached the vault. His fingers closed around the Lantern of Elthar, a golden artifact pulsing with light. And as the shadows closed in, he opened it. 7. The Breaking of the Pact. Light exploded. A blinding, searing force that burned through the throne room, slicing through the darkness. The shadows screamed, writhing in agony, as they were dragged back into the abyss. Darian turned to see the king, flickering between man and nothingness. "You fool," Eldrick rasped, his body dissolving. "Without the pact, we will all be forgotten." The light flared brighter. The kingdom trembled. And then, silence. 8. The Dawn of a New Kingdom. When Darian awoke, the kingdom was still. The shadows were gone. The disappearances had stopped. The people had returned, but with no memory of the vanishing. The king, however, was gone. His throne sat empty, his name already fading from history. As if he had never been. Darian stood at the castle's highest tower, watching the sunrise. The air was lighter, as if an ancient weight had been lifted. But he knew the truth. The shadows had been banished. But they were not destroyed. And one day, when the world had forgotten, they would return. The end.